Senator Adams, you have the floor.
Madam President, I want to thank you for allowing me to make a contribution to this debate. Join my colleagues who have already spoken. And I want to say that I listened attentively to all previous speakers, and I think I'm going to congratulate all of them for having spoken very well. I just want to say as well, in case it is unknown, that people tend to listen to these debates from this chamber, and not just the adults, the older folks, they do. Sometimes they don't have anything else to do. The middle age people do it. But you might be surprised to know that many young people also listen to these debates. And the comments in relation to the quality of the contributions are always very commendable. Perhaps based on my experience in education, I probably will get more comments from students than most other persons. But I do get comments all the time. So I have to be careful with what I say. For example, one young man came to me just a few days ago. He congratulated me about my youthful looks. and then he used then he used some words that I would normally use from an assembly, like erudition and expeditiously and so on. But he said, however, that he has been very pleased with my comments and so on. But he said he was from the St. Leonard School. But he said, you seem to mention the Courage Party School more than the St. Leonard School. So I want to apologize to him if that is really so. But I did assure him that I do mention the St. Leonard School very often indeed. So through the chair, yes, I want to do that. And so, but he was very pleased with that. I say that also to say that when Lady Haynes spoke, part of her contribution dealt quite fulsome and probably meticulously with education, and in particular an aspect of education. I would say the non-traditional part of education, the area in our country that sometimes tend to get second place, that it doesn't have the same status. But she delineated the contributions of the young people, male and female, and I was very pleased to hear her do that. And we want to say that that aspect of education has gone off leaps and bounds, particularly since independence. And I've said that in here before, because I actually left school in 1961. And at that time, not a single area of the non-traditionals, the music and the art and all those things that she just spoke about, was actually on the school curriculum, certainly in my school and several other schools in the island. So we have gone a long way in that regard, and I want to join with her in congratulating our young people for the achievements that they have made in those fields. It is very, very important. In fact, it is in some ways it is the wave of the future. And the second thing I want to say in this day and age, when the sciences, and they're very important, and I extol all persons who, and I myself, try to promote that, the STEM subjects and so on are very important. And sometimes they tend to mask the other areas of education. And we want to I really want to make the point that today, but certainly in the past, and we might not know that several important scholars followed both the sciences and the arts. Painters and all those people were both artists and mathematicians and scientists and so on. And so we should not believe or feel that the arts and the sciences are mutually exclusive. We want to see in our educational system the promotion of both and the encouragement of students, wherever possible, to participate in both, and in that way have a more fulfilling life. And so I was very happy to have heard Lady Haynes dealt with the matter in the way in which she did. I did it too because my contribution will tend to focus also on education, and I'm glad that she did the positive side of it, because maybe most of what I have to say may appear to be not positive, but it should still be seen as being positive. And that is because the topical area of education right now, what is in the news, is something that needs to be looked into, and not certainly in my case to bring any magic wand and to be able to solve the problem just like that, but to look at it and to bring perspective and to ask others to join in the debate in order to help to bring a solution to the problem that we have. And that is extremely important, because even before independence, but certainly since independence, between 18 to 22% of the revenue of the taxpayers in this country have been allocated to education. And I didn't check the figures all that well, but I suspect that it is perhaps in that area even now. An aspect that we need to consider too is that previously education might have appeared to have gotten a free ride, and in some ways it should have gotten this free ride. But as the economy came under some stress, one can imagine that if you were in the cabinet, you would find that cabinet ministers would be questioning the money spent on education and would be asking their colleague, Minister of Education and his parliamentary secretary, to justify these sums, these massive sums of money spent on education. And that is so because they are competing for scarce resources in the government's budget. And in that sense, I believe that they are quite justified in doing so. And therefore, that 18 to 22% that has been spent and is being spent on education can no longer be seen as a mere social service or as a commodity just to be utilized for its own sake. Increasingly, the money spent on education has to be seen and must be seen as an investment in the young people, to provide them with the skills and the information and the techniques to boost our economic growth and to uplift our social capital. And therefore, Madam President, we want to know that they are able to compete in the world, not just in the Caribbean, but in the wider world. and to be able to get Barbados on par with the leading countries in the world, especially in areas where we have some competitive advantage. So to me, that is very important, and I want to say that too because there might be a tendency for us to be somewhat complacent in the sense that when we match ourselves up with our Caribbean neighbors, we tend to be right up there, if not at the very top. And because of that, you get to the stage where you might want to brag and so on and feel that you have made it. But in fact, we are no longer just competing, as I said before, with our Caribbean neighbors. We are competing with the Hong Kongs, as you mentioned, and the Singapores, and various other up-and-coming countries on the African continent, and so on. So, Madam President, I believe that the issue, there is an issue that is very current and very, very topical at the moment, and it has to do with some problem areas in education, and therefore we ought to look at it and see to what extent we can come up with some solutions and help the minister to come up with some solutions. We have been making quite steady progress, but I was reading a comment made by former Senator Marshall while he was ambassador in the UN, and His Excellency made the point that while Barbados has made steady progress over the years in education, and that steady progress was as a result of the investment that we constantly put in education, that we need to focus a bit more on how that investment is being spent so that we would be able to get the best returns for those investments. In other words, he was saying, and rightly so, that we should, to use a little jargon, we should up our game. We should try to do a bit more than we are doing. We may feel that we're doing well. I remember when a new headmaster came to the school, and his first comments at assembly was, he said to the school, he said, "I want you boys," spoke like that, "to do better than your best." To do better than your best. And, you know, we came out of the hall, gone into the classroom, and in came a teacher. It's a good thing about a boys' school. And immediately that statement became a discussion topic in the school. Funnily enough, the master, we called them masters at the time, he virtually felt that the headmaster was talking foolishness. But as the discussion went on, we were able, the students, were able to see and say to him that what the headmaster was really saying was that however well we had done today or before, we should strive to do better the next time. And it was very important, and he became the headmaster at the time when, and I think this is relevant to what I'm saying, when the school a few years before had not been doing so well. And that spurred, those kinds of talks spurred the school on. And you might have heard one of the students from the school said in one of the speeches in the other place that when he came up to Compton Street sometime in the 1960s, it would have been, Senator Boyce, an entire class formed in the lower six in Harrison College was made up of of students from Cordial Party. And I am saying, and I want you to know that it's a fact. But the point is, yes, but the point is that we should be striving to do better than we are doing at the moment. And that is very important. Now, one of the things that is stopping us from getting there is the fact that we are experiencing some bad behavior and indiscipline and violence in our schools. It is not something that we want to sweep under the carpet. And it is not to say that several of our students are not doing well, because they are. However, it would be a moot point to keep saying that there are students doing well and therefore not pay the attention that we ought to pay to the ones that are giving the trouble. Because essentially it is almost like domestic violence. It affects the others. It affects the others. And they often say that they are at risk, but they are also putting other people at risk. And they are preventing us from getting the full impact for the money that we are investing in education. And therefore, that is the reason why I have decided to pay some attention to it. So I believe that there are certain things that we ought to take up as axioms, the basic principles. And one is that the learning and teaching, or the teaching and learning enterprise, I use that word enterprise advisedly, cannot take place in an indisciplined atmosphere. And I just want to say we use the word enterprise because the teaching and learning, real teaching and learning is really an interaction. And therefore, if you are interacting with persons, you don't want to be cantankerous and antagonistic and so on. You have differences and so on, but in the dialectics, you are able to resolve them in that manner. And therefore, we think that it is very important to note that our schools should have that level of discipline, and therefore ought to be seen and known as zones of peace. And wherever we see that there is a threat to it, we ought to intervene. There need to be some methods of intervention in order to deal with it, so that we would minimize the conflict and the confusion and indeed even the violence. So we want to ensure that our schools are characterized by discipline, governed by rules. The school is a rule-governing place. If not, it is not. You can scarcely call it a school. It's ungovernable. It is not a school. And we want to see it as a place where decency and common sense are exhibited, and respect for self and others are also paramount. And I must add that it's a place where differences ought to be settled amicably. Now, the indiscipline that we are seeing, I don't think it just happened overnight. I want to posit the view that the moral fiber of the nation has been kind of slipping, at first imperceptibly, without even noticing it. And then, somewhat gradually, until it has gotten to the stage where we cannot other than see it. And as a result, I believe that we should come together and cry halt. And this is the point that I would want to make. We want to say this is a time when we should cry halt and revert to the situation in which we are comfortable. This is an uncomfortable situation and doesn't augur well for the persons concerned, the students or the teachers, and certainly not for the nation. I was speaking to some teachers the other day, and I think they sought me out, and they gave me the impression that they felt, because we have to, this is a thing that you can't look at it from one side really. You can't say just the children or just the teachers. It has to be a global situation. But the teachers, from their standpoint, felt that they were being set upon. And I want to mention that. And I kind of said to them that it is a feeling that would be natural, especially in the situation that we are. But however, that they are not the first group of teachers who felt that way. And even though teachers who work hard and they're knowledgeable, etc., there are always persons who believe that, you know, teachers are not what they seem to be and so on. And I reminded them of a little passage I came across of the Asian teacher who, a very famous one, his name was Erasmus. And he was approached by some persons who said, why would a man of your intellect waste your time with little children? That is what they asked him. This was like 2,500 years ago. And this is what he said. I actually typed it out. And he said to them, it seems to me a very honorable task to train young people. And it is the very best time in their lives to offer such help. He said, above all, there is no richer reward to one's efforts, for young people are the harvest field and the raw materials of the nation. And I think that needs to be said and to be repeated. That is what teaching is all about. And I shared that with them. And they begin to see things a lot differently. Now, I believe that they will now have a different perspective in what they're doing. But evidence is quite strong. And a good friend of mine, Dr. Butcher, and when he did his research for his doctorate, it was in fact based on indiscipline in schools. It probably was not exactly at the same pace, but it was worrying and worrisome. And this is some of what he said in relation to that. He said that the block culture, with its gang mentality and its penchant for drugs and promiscuous behavior and gross disrespect for a thing, had infused the minds of the young people. That is what he did in his research. This was done in the 1990s. In fact, he came to the school, interviewed me, interviewed students at various schools and various teachers across the island. And this was evident then, and he noted it. He spoke about the indulgence, let me put it that way, the indulgence of parents who kind of felt that children must get instant gratification, when in fact it is the role of parents sometimes to dampen that I want that now situation and let the children know that there's something called deferred gratification, that you work, you build up, and then you enjoy. But not that you just get up and get whatever you wanted to do. And so he felt that homes had some responsibility in that regard as well. And as a result, many children were entering our schools with the kind of idea that they didn't really have to learn anything. and learning would probably drop down from heaven. And as a result, it doesn't happen that way. These particular children, you could bet your life, for one, they would not acquire the language skills that they should ought to have. And in case the psychologist would say to you that one of the type of persons that are more prone to be violent and want to settle things with force are people who lack linguistic skills. It is an area of our school life that we ought to look at. And it is particularly so with the boys. It is happening with girls too, because they become a little more infected. And the boys, as they fail to grasp the learning early and their language skills early, that is part, it's not the only reason, but it's part of their quest to be violent. And we have to do that. But I want to make the point here that now that we are moving towards nursery schools, in other words, the early intervention, that is a very critical time in which to focus on these students, but the boys, because of their the way how they are made. I don't want to go into the whole rigmarole, that they develop and acquire language at a slower rate than girls. And usually in our schools, they are taught together. And I always make the point that teachers ought to be sensitive of that situation, because by the time they reach 11 years old, some girls are 2 years ahead of boys in language. And consequently, you may or may not know that, teachers in schools tend to ask the students who have that facility, for example, to read. Reading is very important, especially reading to people, stand up and read, where you present self and throw your voice to the back of the class and so on. And some boys can go through school without scarcely ever being asked to read. And I will give you an example of this. It's a very true example. A young man was sent to me. It was in fourth form at St. Leonard's. I don't want to be negative over St. Leonard's though, but this is positive too. And I, rather than give him some lashes, I decided to speak with him, largely because he was a cricketer. So I chatted with him, and I had some royal readers that I kept, but 3 and so on. And they always had stories with mottos to them at the end. So I gave him one of these stories to read. And I hope that this will make sense when I finish. So he read it, but for me, I am a man who can't stand bad reading, if you put it that way. He was calling words. So I took the entire lunch period to put him through the paces. And by the time we were approaching the end of lunch, he was able to read it quite well. How to drop his voice, how to look at more than one word and all that sort of thing. And I congratulated him. And he went out of the door. And he came back in. So I said, have you forgotten something? He said, no. He said, I come back to thank you and to let you know that this is the first time in this school that anybody had ever asked me to read. And I think that story needs to be told. Now, as a result of that, I instituted, any person from the school will tell you, I instituted a program in the school. It was actually resisted by 1 or 2 teachers, but I'm very adamant, that's my name. Yes. They were adamant and I was adamant. And in the end, we introduced the system. And I was a walk-around head teacher, so I said when I move around the school, walk about, yes, management by walking about. I said when I walk around the school and the timetable, these periods there, I must see the students reading. And it made a tremendous impact. So I think these are some of the things that we ought to do. The point I am making, though, is that we need not run headlong to legislation. Legislating things for schools is not the very best thing that you ought to do. And I want to make another point. The other point is this, that in terms of secondary schools, and even before that, something like 1733, there was a important secondary school in Barbados. In other words, we had secondary schools in Barbados before the United States, several parts of the United States and so on. So basically, we know something about running schools. And the running of schools have to do a lot with what the lawyers might call the common law, in loco parentis, and those sorts of things, and duty of care. In fact, those are the crux of running a school. The running of school has very little to do with the Education Act. In fact, any person who is a head teacher and so on and run to the act is likely to get into bare trouble. Those are the things that govern the school. And therefore, once you institute that duty of care and so on. The second thing is that the schools in Barbados, and I would want to make sure that Senator Husbands is paying attention. Yes, right. Yeah. So I missed my thing there. The point though is that the making of laws is not the very best thing to do, but the power, the authority, I don't use the power, the authority of running a school really rested in the school. It is only comparatively recently that is kind of centralized. And I think what we are having is an over-centralized bureaucracy in our schools. And there needs to be a sensible approach of handing that authority to the place where it is. If you have selected your principals properly and well, allow them to run the school. If they can't run the school, get rid of them. Because a bad principal can destroy a school in a very short space of time. And therefore, you need to be aware of that. So, and we have a number of case laws about schools. I might not get to everything I want to say. For example, we have situations where you can scarcely ask a student to pick up a piece of paper without running to the ministry or something like that. I'm not making this up. This happened at the school up the road there. And uniforms. I mean, Sir Roy would know the uniform of foundation school is the uniform of foundation school. And it is the authority of the principal to deal with these uniforms in his school. It doesn't have anything to do with anybody anywhere else. And the common law is replete with cases. I can choose one about uniform where a young lady came to school. She said she had some medical problem and came to school in tights or pants or whatever, which was a no-no. And she has to have permission to do that. And the principal sent her back home a couple of times, and the parent went to court. And I wonder if I marked it out here. In fact, Aurelius Smith, I have another document, but he also spoke about it. Now, this is what the Lord Chief Justice Goddard said about that. He said the headmistress shall control the interval organization, management, and discipline of the school. The headmistress obviously has the right and the power to prescribe the discipline for the school. There must be somebody to keep discipline in the school. Otherwise, we have indiscipline. Somebody must be there to control things. The question is, was the headmistress in communicating her refusal to allow the girl to come to school in this way, acting within her rights? That is the question. But that was her duty. And the parent, knowing that the child would not be admitted and insisting on her being dressed up to come into the school, was committing an offense. And you could extrapolate that to several other things that are happening in our society today. You can do that with Major Newton. So you can do that with the headmaster. That is just no, you can do it with me. those are the points. I know the lawyers are in here, and they will probably comment on those. But those are things at common law. The duty of care, how teachers are not to leave the students unattended, and all that sort of thing. And must act in a way that a sensible parent would act. That is the role of a teacher in the school, and so on. And the ability to flog. Now, flogging is on our books. Now, I would be a hypocrite. I don't, if it was a headmaster, I probably wouldn't flog. But I cannot stand up and say that I didn't flog. People would know that they couldn't get away with certain things with me. And therefore, there is nothing inherently wrong, notwithstanding what the agencies and the world, authorities say, that if the flogging is done within the parameters in which it ought to be done, there's nothing wrong with it, because it is better to do that than to have a child destroy the whole school. And the point that I'm going back to all the time is that we are spending 20% of our funds in our schools. And therefore, we ought not to sit idly by and allow things to happen that undermine the authority of principals and the production in the school, and by extension, the economic development of the country. It's very important that those things, that we ought to know that. I spoke before on areas that, I don't know, that seem to be like sacred cows, and I have to speak about them all the time. What happened is that there are certain built-in structural impediments in our school system. It doesn't mean that the school will not function at all, but what it means that as the modern age comes into being, it slows down the progress of the school. And a certain section of the school population will benefit at the expense of others. We have to look, it is a must, at how we allocate students to our schools. And don't fool yourselves, the system that we have, in fact, there are some people of a certain age who feel that it is the only system that existed. It is not the only system that existed, because it did not exist in Barbados before it actually came into being. And secondly, there are several countries in the world that are noted for high performance school achievement that do not allocate the students that way. So we need to look at different things. We cannot spend time defending the status quo when it is making the same kind of mistake over and over again. I have a lot of statistics here. I don't want to go into them. Some of them I have from the BUT going all the way back to the 80s. And what it shows, one of the statistics did show that over 1,000 students got less than 30 marks in the 11th class. I have the statistics all the way down. I quoted the ones from the research white paper recently and so on. And even then, it was showing that the majority of the students who were getting those marks were boys. We have to do something about that. And the reason why we have to do something about it is because boys in this country, I don't know about other countries, traditionally were not known to be dumb. We do not have a history of dumb boys in our primary schools in this country. In fact, it were the boys' schools that excelled in this country. That is a fact. So we need to look at that, not from the standpoint of elitism or whatever, but to do something about it. And what it has done, it has caused the students to crisscross the country. I could speak about this till midnight. I would do that. But I just want to say that we had students from St. Philip, students from Silver Sands, and coming to school at 9:30 and 10 o'clock. Look, the first sign of indiscipline in a school, in any part of the world, is unpunctuality. Don't let anybody fool you. Because certainly in the Barbadian context, the school assembly tells you virtually everything about the school. The old inspectors, when they came to inspect the school, they didn't come in the middle of the day, they came at the assembly. Because the assembly told you, you set the tone of the school at your assembly. So you can't have a real assembly if you only have a quarter or half of the students at school. They're not going to get the notices. They're not going to get the famous speeches that good headmasters make, so on. They're not. They're not going to. They're not going to feel that camaraderie. In fact, they're going to feel alienated from the school, and that is where your problem is coming. The school and the community, the umbilical cord has been cut, and now that we have so many schools in this country, we ought to be seriously looking at a different way of allocating our students to these schools. And we do so, and when we do so, we then would know that we can come up with a proper transportation system. I speak about that at length already, I don't know if I'm going to go over it. You need a proper transportation system for getting your children to school. We are really busing our schools almost. We don't have to take any bad examples from the United States about busing children to school. We should have school buses that bring children to their school in their locality. And we do not have to have a situation where you have to bus black children into white areas and all that sort of thing. The child live in St. Lucie and so on. And the point I'm making is, I can speak from experience. I went to a particular school, as you know. And when I was there in the 1950s, we had school buses coming from St. Lucie to the school. When I got to be principal of the school, not a single bus came to the school from St. Lucie. The bus came from Silver Sands and all these far-flung places and got to school late. And therefore, it is something that we need to look at if we want to control discipline in school. And the kind of behavior that exhibited in those areas are something that needs to be looked at. And so the concept of allocating the students to school, and again, we do not have to have the 11 plus. You can have, because let me say something. The 11 plus is basically, and I can say this without fear of contradiction, an exam that was imported into this country from the United Kingdom. It has nothing at all to do with the genius of the Barbadian psyche and so on. And it is the brainchild of a right-wing psychologist, Cyril Burt, whose avowed aim was to keep working-class children out of the grammar schools in the United Kingdom. And it was then taken over into the United States, the racist sentiment in relation to the black children in schools. The gentleman's name is Jensen, J-E-N-S-E-N. I think he was at Stanford. And he publicly went and published work showing that black people were genetically inferior to all the other races in the United States. And he went further and said that it was a waste of time voting money to educate the people because there was a ceiling in their intellectual capacity. Yes, that is the kind of thing that we need. You can research this. I can say this without fear of contradiction. And the United Kingdom has really said this sort of thing can no longer happen in our country. That we need to open up our schools. And some of the most outstanding schools in the United Kingdom now, I went to North London 2 or so years ago, and schools in North London, what they call the comprehensive schools, they were the most some of the most achieving schools in the United Kingdom. So we need to look at things. We need to uplift the students, those students who are giving trouble. We need to be doing something special about them. Early education, linguistic help, In fact, parenting is very important because I would suggest that when we have our nursery schools and so on, that parents ought to have at least a day a week or a day every 2 weeks coming to the schools. The nursery schools can partner with Parados and other things. And the same parents that are bringing the students to the nursery school ought to have parenting lessons and so on. And it is things like that, not literally going to Parliament to pass a law to lock up a parent and so on, because in the end you can't lock up a parent. When you lock up the parent, who's going to do with the child? So I just want to make these things, I can go on a bit more, but I think I've said enough. And I hope that they would help to move the discussion on. The 11 plus is not sacrosanct. Any person at Erdeston, any person in the Ministry of Education who researched it would see that it was done on fraudulent research. Fraudulent research about twins. The type of twins, that's the name of the identical twins. He fraudulently manufactured identical twins to prove the point that intelligence was inherited and that the environment did not have anything to do. And that is a lie. It's not true. The two things interact. And those are the things that we want to look at. So if we want to keep abreast with the Singapores and various other places and to do better than we are doing now, to do better than our best, these are the type of areas that I believe we ought to be looking at. And it will not take a year, it will not take 6 months to bring the necessary people together and come up with a plan of action. And we in Barbados know how to run schools. You don't just say to do this. Put an inspectorate in place. Barbados, we have a notion about teacher evaluation, which I think we don't get done properly. But there was a time when a handful of inspectors kept the schools in Barbados on their toes. And if you have a school, in case the ministry may not know this, if you have a school that is giving trouble, you have a full inspection at the school. A full inspection is a very powerful thing. We had some difficulties at some schools, and I realized that they don't know. When you set up a full inspection, the full inspection almost have plenipotentiary powers. When it reports to the ministry, it report to the ministry with a plan of action for the school, including moving the head and so on. So that is how you keep your schools in the range in which you want. They're not going to be perfect, but they're not going to descend into the level of bedlam that we want. And that is why I thought that I would make my contribution in that area. And I actually have with me, I have all kinds of research. I have with me a lot of research of the fantastic achievements of students in this country and at schools where I taught. Even the other day, a young man called Sam Peters. You follow these things, Senator Boyce, and he is one of the chief men at one of the banks here, CIBC Bank, and he was from St. Leonard's School. But so as students are doing well, and they will continue to do well, we want to uplift the students who are not benefiting in the same way as others are benefiting, and are causing trouble in the schools, and are infecting other people's children. And that is the thing that we want to do. So, Madam President, with those few words, I'm obliged.